In this video, we uncover the chilling true stories of Arizona's most twisted women killers, real-life cases that defy belief. From mothers turned murderers to unsuspecting neighbors with deadly secrets, these shocking crimes will leave you speechless. Each case is a dark chapter in Arizona's criminal history, revealing how far some are willing to go when darkness takes over. Stay with us as we dive into the full list of these terrifying women and the twisted acts they committed. 1. Wendi Elizabeth Andriano, October 8, 2000. Ahwatukee, Arizona. A woman stands over the bloodied body of her husband, the handle of a knife slick in her hand. A bar stool shattered beside her. The man on the floor, weak, sick, dying, never stood a chance. Wendi Elizabeth Andriano was born on August 6, 1970. To most, she seemed like a devoted mother and a supportive wife. She lived in a modest apartment with her husband Joe and their 2 young children. But behind the carefully staged facade, something darker was stirring. Joe Andriano had been diagnosed with terminal cancer 2 years earlier. The disease ravaged his body and left him frail, dependent, vulnerable. As his condition worsened, Wendi's resentment deepened. Once a manager and a mother, she now spent her nights drinking in bars and entertaining extramarital affairs. And in the shadows, she began laying the groundwork for murder. She asked friends to impersonate Joe so she could purchase a life insurance policy. She scoured the internet for information on poisons, finally settling on sodium azide, a pesticide known for its agonizing, lethal effects. She had it shipped to a separate business to avoid suspicion. No insurance policy was ever finalized, but the plan was already in motion. In the early morning hours of October 8th, Wendi called 911. Joe, she claimed, was having a heart attack. When paramedics arrived, she turned them away, saying Joe had a do not resuscitate order and wanted to die in peace. It was a lie. By the time she called 911 again, it was too late. Joe was dead, stabbed once in the neck and beaten in the head more than 20 times with a metal bar stool. Toxicology reports revealed sodium azide in his system. Weak from both chemotherapy and poison, he could neither fight back nor flee. At trial, Wendi claimed self-defense, that Joe, enraged by her confession of an affair, tried to strangle her with a phone cord, that he stabbed himself in the neck in a moment of despair. The jury didn't believe her. Prosecutor Juan Martinez described the murder as shockingly evil. The motive was financial, an anticipated payout from a malpractice lawsuit and imagined insurance money. The reality was far more horrifying, a man dying slowly of cancer, murdered violently by the person he trusted most. On November 18, 2004, Wendi Andriano was convicted of first-degree murder. A month later, the court sentenced her to death, citing the cruelty of the act, both physical and psychological. Joe had been poisoned, left to suffer, then bludgeoned until his skull fractured in over 20 places. Appeals followed, claiming bias and procedural missteps. They failed. In 2007, the Arizona Supreme Court upheld her sentence. Today, Wendi Andriano sits on death row at the Lumley Unit in Perryville Prison, one of only a few women awaiting execution in Arizona. In her own words, she once said, "I never meant for any of this to happen." But intent means little when weighed against suffering, betrayal, and the haunting silence of a man who can no longer speak for himself. 2. Jodi Ann ARIAS, June 4, 2008. Mesa, Arizona. In the stillness of a suburban home behind a locked door and a running shower, Travis Alexander was brutally murdered. He suffered more than 27 stab wounds. His throat was slit from ear to ear, and a bullet had been fired into his skull. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated execution. His killer was someone he once trusted, Jodi Ann ARIAS. Born July 9, 1980, in Salinas, California. Jodi appeared ordinary. bright-eyed, soft-spoken, artistic. But beneath the surface lay something volatile, possessiveness cloaked as love obsession confused for loyalty. Jodi met Travis Alexander, a motivational speaker and devout Mormon, at a company conference in 2006. By the end of that year, she had converted to his faith. Within months, they became a couple. But their love was far from pure. It was a secret tangled in guilt, religion, and forbidden sex. The relationship ended in 2007. But Jodi didn't move on. She moved closer, literally relocating from California to Arizona. When that failed to rekindle the romance, she returned to her grandparents' home. Yet the fixation remained. Travis had planned a trip to Cancun. Jodi wasn't invited. Another woman was. That's when something inside her snapped. In the days before the murder, Jodi borrowed gas cans to avoid stopping for fuel, leaving no paper trail. She dyed her hair brown, rented a car, and drove over 1,000 miles to Mesa. On June 4th, she spent the day with Travis. They took photos, provocative ones. The last image shows Travis in the shower. The timestamp is 5:29 p.m. Within minutes, he would be dead. A broken digital camera recovered from a washing machine held more than photographs. It held a timeline. Jodi tried to cover her tracks. She returned the rental car stained with what looked like Kool-Aid. She attended a conference in Utah as if nothing had happened. But cuts on her hands, a missing license plate, and an upside-down tag drew suspicion. Her stories shifted. First, she wasn't there. Then masked intruders. Finally, self-defense. Evidence told a different story. A bullet matching the caliber of a stolen gun from her grandparents' home, a bloody palm print, and photos showing the moments before and after the attack. Jodi Arias was arrested on July 15, 2008, and charged with first-degree murder. Her trial became a media frenzy. For 18 days, she testified, accusing Travis of abuse, claiming trauma, presenting herself as the true victim. But the jury saw through it. On May 8, 2013, Jodi Arias was found guilty of premeditated first-degree murder. Her sentencing would drag on for years, one mistrial, then another. Ultimately, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Today, Jodi Arias remains incarcerated in Arizona. She once told the media, "No jury will convict me, because I'm innocent." She was wrong. But perhaps more chilling, she said it with a smile. 3. Doris Ann CARLSON. October 25, 1996. Peoria, Arizona. An elderly woman is found bleeding, barely alive, in the dim glow of her nursing home bedroom. Her throat slashed, her chest stabbed. Her voice trembling, she whispers that she fought them off as hard as she could. The attackers were teenagers, but the mind behind the crime was far more sinister. Doris Ann CARLSON was 34 years old. Born in 1962, she appeared to be an ordinary woman, a wife, a caretaker, a struggling homemaker. But beneath the surface, Doris had grown bitter. She resented the woman she lived with, her disabled mother-in-law, Mary Lynn CARLSON, who controlled the money Doris and her husband depended on. Lynn suffered from multiple sclerosis. Confined to a wheelchair, she was frail, vulnerable, and by all accounts, kind. Doris, however, mocked her illness, claiming Lynn was faking. Her temper flared often, but words weren't enough. By the fall of 1996, Doris and her husband, David CARLSON, Lynn's only son, were broke. When Lynn moved to a nursing facility, her annuity checks and trust payments stopped arriving at their home. The money they believed should have been theirs. So Doris devised a plan. She recruited 2 young boarders living in her home, John McReekin, just 20, and 17-year-old Scott Smith. She promised them $20,000, each, money that would come once Lynn was dead and the inheritance cleared. She gave them gloves, scoped out the facility with them in advance, and even drove them to the scene. In the early hours of October 25th, Doris dropped them off outside Lynn's apartment. McReekin slipped inside. Smith staged a fake burglary. McReekin, after a moment's hesitation, closed his eyes and stabbed the elderly woman again and again. But Lynn survived. When staff found her bleeding and barely conscious, she gave a name them. It was clear this was not a robbery gone wrong. It was a planned, deliberate attack. Lynn endured 6 agonizing months of surgery's pain and fading hope. She died on April 21st, 1997. Less than a month after the stabbing, Doris, her husband, and the 2 teens were arrested. When police pieced together the conspiracy, it became clear Doris had engineered the killing for one reason: greed. She was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and burglary. At her 1999 trial, the jury found her guilty on all counts. In March 2000, a judge sentenced her to death. The court found the crime especially heinous and cruel, and fueled by cold financial motives. Doris offered money for a life, and when that life wouldn't willingly give up control, she took it. Her sentence was later reduced to natural life without parole. She remains incarcerated in Arizona ADC inmate number 150516. Her name rarely surfaces now, but her actions left a permanent mark. One elderly woman brutally betrayed, a family broken by greed, and a chilling truth: sometimes the greatest threat to your life is already inside your home. 4. Cynthia Lynn Kaufman. October 1986. California's quiet coastal towns are gripped by fear. 4 women vanish in just over a month. Their bodies, strangled, brutalized, and discarded, tell the story of a killer without remorse. And behind the wheel of this carnage, a couple bound not by love, but by bloodshed. Cynthia Lynn Kaufman was born in 1962 in St. Louis, Missouri. Raised Catholic in a troubled home, her father abandoned the family early, and her mother once tried to give her and her brothers away. At 17, Cynthia became a mother herself and entered a marriage that quickly crumbled. Seeking escape, she fled west, leaving behind the remnants of a fractured life. She arrived in Arizona alone, working dead-end jobs. But her path changed forever in a California jailhouse where she met a man named James Marlowe, a meth-addicted ex-con and self-proclaimed white supremacist known as the Folsom Wolf. Within weeks, Cynthia left her old life behind and hit the road with him, entering a dark spiral of drugs, violence, and murder. The spree began in October 1986. 32-year-old Sandra Neary disappeared while withdrawing cash from an ATM in Costa Mesa. Her decomposing body was found weeks later, strangled in the hills near Corona. Pamela Simmons, 35, was next abducted from Bullhead City, Arizona. Then came 20-year-old Corinna Novus, kidnapped in broad daylight, near a shopping mall in Redlands. Days later, 19-year-old Lionel Murray, a psychology student working at a dry cleaner's in Huntington Beach, was found raped and strangled in a motel bathtub. Police were racing against time. The break came when Novus's checkbook turned up in a trash bin, tucked inside a fast food bag, with receipts bearing the names Kaufman and Marlowe. Soon after, the pair were tied to a motel room, littered with evidence linking them to the murders, including forged documents and victim belongings. A manhunt began. On November 14, 1986, a 100-man task force descended on the mountain town of Big Bear. Marlowe and Kaufman were found hiking through the woods, wearing clothes stolen from their most recent victim. Cynthia surrendered without a struggle, but her cooperation wasn't over. Within hours, she led detectives to Corinna Novus's shallow grave in a vineyard near Fontana. The charges were severe: 4 murders, multiple kidnappings, sexual assault, and armed robbery. Cynthia's defense claimed she was a battered woman controlled by Marlowe, abused and afraid for her life. But jurors didn't believe she was a helpless passenger. In 1989, she became the first woman sentenced to death in California since 1977. A second trial added a life sentence without parole. COFFMAN remains on death row in California. She once said, "I'm trying to understand why I did things, but I'm still not all the way there." Manipulated, or manipulator. To some, she was a victim who fell under the sway of a violent man. To others, she was his equal, a willing partner in a spree of murder and terror. Either way, Cynthia COFFMAN's name is forever etched into the history of America's deadliest couples. 5. Marissa Suzanne DEVAULT, January 14, 2009. Gilbert, Arizona. Dale Harrell lay asleep beside his wife when the first hammer blow struck. Within seconds, his skull was fractured, the bedroom painted with blood. The weapon, a claw hammer. The attacker, his wife Marissa Suzanne DEVAULT. Born November 6, 1977. Marissa DEVAULT appeared to many as a devoted mother of three, soft-spoken and emotionally fragile. But beneath the surface was a woman living a double life, one built on deception, manipulation, and deepening financial desperation. DEVAULT had racked up nearly $300,000 in loans from Alan Flores, a wealthy businessman she met through a sugar daddy dating site. With debt closing in and pressure mounting, she saw only one escape: the $1 million life insurance policy on her husband's life. On that January night, while Dale Harrell slept peacefully in their shared bed, DEVAULT struck him in the head repeatedly. He suffered catastrophic brain trauma, but did not die immediately. For nearly a month, he struggled to survive until a blood clot ended his life in a hospice bed. Marissa's story changed repeatedly. First, she told police that Harrell had attacked and choked her. Then she claimed another man, her mentally impaired housemate, had killed him. The man even signed a confession. But blood spatter evidence told a different story. Dale was alone in the bed. The blood on Marissa's clothes matched the spray pattern of a killer standing over the victim, hammer in hand. Eventually, she confessed. But even then, the narrative shifted. This time, she claimed Harrell had raped her, and she lashed out in rage. Prosecutors said it was murder for money, carefully planned and heartlessly executed. During the trial, the court heard disturbing jailhouse recordings where DEVAULT laughed while describing the attack. Clinical psychologist Dr. Janine DeMart diagnosed her with antisocial personality disorder and called her a psychopath, emotionally detached, manipulative, and remorseless. The prosecution built their case around motive-mounting debt, a failing marriage, and the promise of a $1 million payout. Flores, her wealthy lover, testified under immunity. Child pornography had been discovered on his computer during the investigation. Still, he claimed DEVAULT had discussed hiring a hitman or staging a rape to justify killing Dale. The defense countered with a story of trauma, of childhood abuse and domestic violence, but witnesses failed to corroborate those claims. Her own daughter testified that the household was chaotic, but friends and neighbors never saw Dale act violently. On April 8, 2014, after a 2-month trial, the jury found Marissa DEVAULT guilty of first-degree murder. The prosecution sought the death penalty, but after 3 days of deliberation, the jury spared her life. On April 30th, she was sentenced to life in prison, with eligibility for parole after 25 years. From her jail cell, DEVAULT wept, telling the jury, "I am supposed to protect you, and instead, I hurt you." But to many, her tears came far too late. A mother, a manipulator, a murderer. Marissa DEVAULT traded her husband's life for a payday she never received. 6. Eva DUGAN. In the winter of 1927, an Arizona rancher named Andrew J. Mathis vanished without a trace. His car, his cash box, and his housekeeper, Eva DUGAN, were all gone. Dugan was a drifter with a colorful past. Born in 1878, she'd chased gold and glamour through Alaska as a cabaret singer during the Klondike Rush. By the time she reached Arizona, she'd been married 5 times, and none of her husbands were ever seen again. She settled in Pima County, where she worked briefly for SMITHEY, a reclusive chicken farmer. Their arrangement lasted just 2 weeks. After that, he fired her, then disappeared. Neighbors grew suspicious when Eva began selling SMITHEY's belongings. His prized Dodge Coupe surfaced in Kansas City, sold for $600 by a woman claiming to be his wife. Police traced the trail eastward, finally tracking Eva to White Plains, New York. A postcard she mailed to her father in California led to her arrest. She was extradited to Arizona, at first only for auto theft, but 9 months later, the real story came to light. A camper hammering tent stakes on Mathis's property stumbled upon a shallow grave. Inside, buried with lime and gagged, was the decomposed body of Andrew Mathis. Eva Dugan was charged with murder. The case against her was entirely circumstantial. No fingerprints, no murder weapon, no confession. But the jury didn't hesitate. She was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to hang. In prison, Dugan became infamous. She granted interviews for $1 apiece and sold embroidered handkerchiefs to fund her own coffin. She even sewed a silk-beaded jazz dress intended to be her burial gown. Despite her looming execution, she stayed upbeat. One reporter dubbed her Cheerful Eva, but her bravado masked deeper fears. The day before, her hanging prison guards found ammonia and razor blades hidden in her cell. Rumors spread she would take her own life before the state could. On February 21, 1930, at dawn, Eva Dugan was led to the gallows at Arizona State Prison in Florence. She was calm, composed. "Don't hold my arms so tight," she told the guards. "The people will think I'm afraid." She had no final words. At 5:11 a.m., the trapdoor opened. The drop was too long. The noose snapped taut and severed her head from her body. It rolled across the floor, stopping at the feet of horrified spectators. 5 people fainted. Eva Dugan was the first woman ever executed by the state of Arizona, and the last person hanged there. Her gruesome death made national headlines. The public outcry was swift and severe. By 1934, Arizona abandoned the gallows, replacing it with the gas chamber. She had once said, "I'll die with my boots on and in full health. That's more than most of you old coots can say." In the end, she did. Decapitated by the state, she defied Eva Dugan, remains a haunting figure in the dark annals of American justice, defiant to the last breath and unforgettable in death. 7. Shawna Forde, May 30, 2009. Arivaca, Arizona. Just after midnight. A knock echoed through the Flores family home. On the porch stood a woman and 2 armed men posing as law enforcement. They said they were searching for fugitives. Raul Jr. Flores, a father of 2, opened the door. Within seconds, the night became a massacre. At the center of it all was Shawna Forde, a self-styled patriot and the founder of a rogue vigilante group called Minutemen American Defense. Her mission to protect the U.S.-Mexico border at any cost. But the truth was darker. Forde needed money to fund her private militia, and she believed Raul Flores, a suspected drug trafficker, had enough to bankroll her cause. Forde was born December 6, 1967. Her past was riddled with failed marriages, criminal charges, and delusions of influence. She had worked as a cosmetologist, a band promoter, even ran for city council in Everett, Washington. But beneath the surface was volatility. Former Minutemen expelled her in 2007, calling her unstable. That same year, she founded her own group MAD, with ambitions as grandiose as they were violent. The plan was ruthless: break into the Flores home, steal drugs, weapons, and money, and leave no witnesses. But Gina Gonzalez Raul's wife survived. She watched her husband gunned down in front of her, shot herself, then lay still, pretending to be dead, as her 9-year-old daughter Brisenia begged for her life. The killer reloaded and executed the child, where she slept, her puppy beside her. Minutes later, Gonzalez, bleeding and in shock, called 911. When the attackers returned to finish the job, she shot back, wounding one of them, Jason Gunny Bush. Ford Bush and a third accomplice, Albert Gaxiola, were arrested within days. Evidence tied them to the crime: stolen jewelry from the Flores home, text messages implicating Ford, and chilling testimony from Gonzalez. At trial, prosecutors described Ford as the mastermind. The jury agreed. On February 14, 2011, she was found guilty on 8 counts, including 2 counts of first-degree murder. 8 days later, she was sentenced to death, becoming the 3rd woman on Arizona's death row. Her accomplices didn't escape justice. Bush was also sentenced to death. Gaxiola received life without parole. Shawna Forde remains on death row, her legacy stained not by patriotism, but by the blood of a man and his child. Her warped ideology, her paranoia, and her lust for power led to one of the most heinous home invasions in Arizona history. As Brisenia's mother recalled in court, she was asking, "Why did you shoot my dad?" And then he shot her again. No border was defended that night. No justice served by guns and lies. Only a family destroyed, and a nation left to reckon with what extremism truly costs. 8. Galareka Harrison. In the early hours of September 5, 2007, the University of Arizona campus was still dark and silent until someone heard the screams. Inside Graham Greenlee Residence Hall, 2 promising young women, both 18, both Navajo, both on scholarships, shared a dorm room meant to represent opportunity, but instead it became the scene of betrayal and murder. Galareka Harrison, born March 26, 1989, was raised in Chinle on the Navajo Nation. She was an accomplished rodeo competitor, a track athlete, and had dreams of becoming a pharmacist. Like her roommate Mia Henderson of Tuba City, she was one of the tribe's rising stars, 2 young women who had made it off the reservation with full rides to college. They were part of the university's Native American Scholars Program. They were meant to be sisters in education, but they barely knew each other. By the 2nd week of school, things had already unraveled. Mia discovered her bank account drained, her student ID, her social security card gone. She reported Galareka to campus police. The theft totaled $500, 2 forged checks, and an identity stolen. But the response was casual. Officers reportedly chuckled, told the girls to let bygones be bygones, and walk away. Mia refused. She pressed charges. She demanded Harrison be removed from their room. Instead, Galareka left for the Labor Day weekend and came back with a knife. At 5:45 a.m., Mia was asleep. Galareka struck. 23 stab wounds, 7 of them fatal. Lungs, kidney, liver punctured. Mia fought back. There were defensive wounds on her hands, but it wasn't enough. Harrison faked her own injuries, slashed her leg, screamed for help, told other students an unknown man had attacked them both, told police she'd been ambushed. She even wrote a fake suicide note pretending to be Mia, trying to make it look like her victim had been the real thief. But the evidence told a different story. A surveillance camera showed Harrison buying the knife. Witnesses heard the screams, and the blood everywhere spoke louder than lies. Her arrest came the same day. The trial was swift. On September 2008, Galareka Harrison was found guilty of first-degree murder, identity theft, and forgery. On November 25, 2008, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In court, she whispered for forgiveness. But her silence couldn't undo what she'd done. Judge Nanette Warner said it plainly: "You killed her in a very violent way with repeated stabbing. There's just no way around that. This was not a crime of passion. It was premeditated, cold, calculated. A gifted young woman killed another out of fear, anger, and humiliation." Mia Henderson was called Princess by her friends. She was the top of her class, a softball team captain, and a rising scientist. Her future was limitless until a roommate decided to end it. Two daughters of the same land, one lost forever, the other locked away for life, and a tribe left to mourn them both. 9. Carol HATLEY, July 30th, 2012. Phoenix, Arizona. Inside a modest home near North 47th Avenue, officers found a scene of horror. A 73-year-old woman dead on the floor, her body partially dismembered, wrapped in plastic, surrounded by garbage bags. The woman responsible stood just feet away, emotionless. Her name was Carol HATLEY, and the victim was her own mother. Carol Ann HATLEY was born in 1970, raised in the very home where the crime would one day take place. By her early 40s, her life was unraveling. Family described her as an alcoholic, volatile when drunk. She had moved back in with her aging mother, Debra, just 10 months earlier. The two shared a strained relationship, one marred by tension and control. Behind closed doors, their home had become a battlefield. On that summer night, the conflict came to a brutal end. Authorities believe Debra was stabbed multiple times in a violent outburst. No forced entry, no outside suspect. Just a mother and daughter, one with wounds, the other with a knife. At 3:30 a.m., Carol stumbled to a neighbor's home. Drunk, detached. She claimed her mother was dead and asked them to call 911. But the timeline didn't add up. She later told police she had found her mother around 7 p.m., more than 7 hours earlier. What had she been doing during that time, according to detectives dismembering the body? When officers arrived, Carol was still intoxicated. Her statements were contradictory and evasive. She said she had been wrapping her mother to take her to a hospital. She couldn't explain the hours of delay or the presence of trash bags scattered across the scene. She showed no remorse, no grief, just a flat, passive demeanor. Investigators found signs that the body had been tampered with. Carol admitted to handling 2 weapons. Her attempt to obscure the crime was both clumsy and chilling. The autopsy confirmed what police already suspected: Debra HATLEY had been stabbed to death. The motive still unclear, but family members told police what they already feared: Carol had long struggled with alcohol. And when drunk, she could become unpredictable, dangerous. She was arrested the same day. In court, prosecutors revealed the gruesome details. The defense offered no alternative theory. On April 24, 2013, Carol HATLEY accepted a plea deal. She was sentenced to 22 years in prison for second-degree murder. She never offered a clear explanation, never shed a public tear. When asked why she didn't call 911 immediately, she had no answer. A neighbor later recalled Carol's final words before being taken into custody. "It was so bloody. A woman who once lived in her mother's care ended her mother's life with a knife and plastic bags. A lifetime of tension ended not in reconciliation, but in cold silence." Today, Carol HATLEY serves her sentence in an Arizona prison. Her mother's home, once filled with laughter and Southern charm, is now a permanent crime scene, a symbol of love destroyed by violence. 10. Winnie Ruth Judd, October 16, 1931. Inside a small bungalow on North 2nd Street in Phoenix, Arizona. Jealousy, secrets, and obsession collided in bloodshed. Winnie Ruth Judd, a 26-year-old medical secretary, shot and killed her two closest friends, Agnes Ann Leroy and Hedvig Sammy Samuelson. By morning, one woman was dead in her bed, the other dismembered and stuffed into steamer trunks. The press would dub her the trunk murderess. But the full truth remains tangled in betrayal, madness, and influence. Born in Indiana in 1905 to a strict Methodist family, Ruth's early life was marked by emotional instability and wild fabrication. She married Dr. William Judd at 17, a morphine addict and twice her age. The marriage spiraled into poverty, addiction, and loss, driving Ruth deeper into mental decline. By the time she arrived in Phoenix, she was fragile emotionally and financially. She found work at the Grunow Clinic, where she met Agnes and Sammy. The three became inseparable, until a man came between them. Jack Halloran was a wealthy, well-connected businessman, a known playboy. Ruth fell for him hard. So did Agnes, and perhaps Sammy. The triangle turned toxic. The women's friendship began to rot. On the night of October 16th, something snapped. The state claimed Ruth crept into their home and shot them as they slept. Ruth insisted there was a violent struggle, that she acted in self-defense, and that Halloran helped cover it up. But what happened next chilled the nation. Ruth dragged the bodies into trunks. She hacked Sammy's limbs apart, packing her remains into a trunk, a suitcase, and a hatbox. Agnes's body, intact, was folded into another. 2 days later, Ruth boarded a train to Los Angeles with the luggage. Blood seeped from the seams. The smell drew attention. By the next morning, baggage handlers called police. Ruth vanished into the city. She re-emerged a week later, surrendering to authorities in a funeral home. "I did it," she said. "If Jack Halloran were arrested, it would all come out." The trial became a media circus. The public called her a monster. The prosecution painted her as a jealous, scorned woman. The defense claimed insanity, but offered no physical proof. Ruth was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to hang. But days before the execution, a mental health hearing changed her fate. She was declared insane and sent to the Arizona State Asylum. She escaped 6 times. Once she lived free for 6.5 years as a maid in California. Eventually she was caught and returned. In 1971 she was finally paroled. She lived quietly until her death in 1998 at age 93. Jack Halloran was never tried. Despite Ruth's testimony that he destroyed evidence and moved the bodies, his social clout kept him safe. He lost his reputation, but not his freedom. "I'll hang for what Jack Halloran did," she once said. "He is guilty of anything I am guilty of." Was she a cold-blooded killer? A woman pushed to the edge, or a pawn in a powerful man's cover-up? To this day, the trunks remain closed, but the questions never have. 11. Diane Lynn Marsh, March 22, 2007. Pima County, Arizona. 5-year-old Brandon Williams was found unresponsive, his body cold and bruised with trauma so severe it would later be described as torture. His skull had been fractured. His feet were scalded. His limbs bore the fading marks of months-long abuse. The boy was autistic, nonverbal, defenseless. The woman responsible for his care was his mother, Diane Lynn Marsh. Diane was once a U.S. Air Force airman, medically discharged after 9 years of service. She later worked as a medical secretary. By all accounts, she was capable, smart, independent. But somewhere between duty and motherhood, Marsh began to fall apart. Her decline began years earlier. Child Protective Services had intervened with her 2 older sons, neglect, instability, suspected abuse. Those boys were eventually removed. When Brandon was born, he became her last remaining child, and her last remaining control. By 2006, Marsh had stopped cooperating with social workers. She withdrew Brandon from school and moved into a motel with two homeless acquaintances, Flower Thompson and Mark Lee Moss, a convicted child molester. What followed was 6 months of escalating cruelty. Brandon was tied to bedposts, scalded in hot water, drugged with adult sleeping pills, locked inside his bedroom, and finally killed. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma, a fractured skull, internal bleeding. Prosecutors believed Brandon's head was slammed against a tile floor, but no one would confess. Not Marsh, not Thompson. When questioned, Marsh claimed she had been manipulated by Thompson, convinced that satanic cults were after them, that Brandon was worth $3.4 million as a sacrifice. She told the court that fear had made her compliant, that she was just trying to protect her son. The jury didn't buy it. In August 2008, Marsh was convicted of negligent homicide and 4 counts of child abuse. The judge, Hector Campoy, said it plainly. "You may be a good person to your church, but you were a horrible person to Brandon. His blood is on your hands." She was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Her accomplice, Flower Thompson, received the same sentence also, without ever admitting responsibility. Moss, whose silence shielded him under the Fifth Amendment, walked away with no charges. Brandon's father, Melvin Williams, had been paying child support. He didn't know where his son was. He later said, "She could have kept the money. I just wanted my son back." He never got that chance. In the courtroom, Marsh wept, but her remorse came too late. She claimed to be changed, to have found God. But phone calls from jail told a different story, more concerned with casting out devils than acknowledging the truth. Brandon was 5, autistic, vulnerable, and all he ever needed was love. Instead, he was beaten, drugged, and broken in the place he should have felt safest, his own home. "Why is my mom doing this to me?" That's the question Judge Campoy said he couldn't shake. Neither can we. 12. Debra Jean MILKE, December 2, 1989. Phoenix, Arizona. 4-year-old Christopher Milk was dressed in his favorite outfit. His mother, Debra Jean Milk, told him he was going to see Santa Claus. Instead, she sent him on a one-way trip into the desert. Debra Milk was born in Germany in 1964. Raised in a military household, she later moved to the U.S., joined the workforce, married, had a child, and then divorced. By the time Christopher was 4, Debra was a single mother living with a man named James Stiers. Stiers, she later told police, was someone she trusted. But trust would turn fatal. That afternoon, Stiers took Christopher to the Metro Center Mall, so he claimed. He told Milk that her son had gone missing while he was in the restroom. Panic set in. A call to 911 launched a frantic search, but it was a lie. There was no Santa, no mall outing, no missing child. The next day, Stiers' friend Roger Scott cracked under pressure. After hours of interrogation, he told detectives everything. They had driven Christopher out to a remote wash north of Phoenix. While the boy played, Stiers pulled a gun and shot him 3 times in the back of the head. The motive, just $5,000, a life insurance policy. Debra Milk Scott said had asked them to kill her son. Milk was brought in for questioning. According to Detective Armando Saldate, she confessed to orchestrating the murder. But there was no recording, no written statement, no witnesses. Just Saldate's word. 3 days later, the boy's body was found in the desert, lying face down in the sand, his chewing gum still clenched between his teeth. At trial, prosecutors argued that Milk was tired of being a mother, that her job, her image, and her new relationship mattered more than the child she brought into the world. They said she used the life insurance money as a bribe, promising Stiers a cut, and Scott a mere $250 for his silence. On January 18, 1991, Debra Jean MILKE was sentenced to death. She became the first woman in Arizona to receive that sentence since 1932. Stiers and Scott were also convicted and joined her on death row. But MILKE's case was far from over. Years later, a federal appeals court uncovered serious flaws in the investigation. Soldate, the lead detective, had a history of misconduct. And most damning, the alleged confession had never been corroborated. In 2013, after 23 years on death row, MILKE's conviction was overturned. The court ruled that prosecutors had failed to disclose Soldate's disciplinary history and had relied solely on a confession that may never have happened. Debra MILKE walked free. James Stiers remains on death row. Roger Scott's sentence is under review. MILKE claims innocence to this day, but her son Christopher remains silent. Forever 4 years old, forever lost to the desert. She told him he was going to see Santa. Instead, he met his killers. 13. Marjorie Ann ORBIN. September 8, 2004, Phoenix, Arizona. Jay Orban had just returned home from a business trip to Florida. It was his 45th birthday. By the end of the day, he would be dead, his body dismembered, his torso stuffed into a plastic container and abandoned in the desert. His killer, his wife, Marjorie Ann ORBIN. Marjorie was once a Las Vegas showgirl, a beauty shaped by the stage and hardened by survival. Married 7 times by her mid-30s, she finally settled into what seemed like the perfect life. A wealthy husband, a beautiful home, and a miracle son she had long thought impossible. But Marjorie wanted more. While Jay was away selling Native American jewelry across the country, Marjorie was seeing other men. At least 8 affairs would later be revealed in court. Detectives would allege that her husband's return disrupted the double life she'd built, and that she killed him to keep it. According to investigators, sometime after Jay pulled into the garage that day, Marjorie retrieved a revolver from his briefcase and shot him. The murder weapon was never recovered. The motive: money and freedom. Within 48 hours, she began draining his accounts. Over $45,000 gone. She purchased a $12,000 baby grand piano. She told friends Jay had left town again on business, but credit card records showed otherwise. Jay never left Phoenix. He never even left the house. By October, the deception collapsed. A transient stumbled upon a plastic tub in the desert. Inside was a human torso, headless, limbless, and wrapped in plastic. DNA confirmed it was Jay Orban. The rest of his body has never been found. Surveillance footage showed Marjorie purchasing identical tubs using Jay's credit card just days after he was last seen. Receipts proved she'd bought mops cleaning chemicals and garage floor epoxy scrubbing away the crime scene. She was arrested on December 6, 2004, and charged with first-degree murder. At trial, prosecutors painted her as manipulative, calculating, and cold. She had motive, opportunity, and a paper trail of lies. Her lovers testified. So did a jailhouse informant who claimed Marjorie bragged about dismembering Jay's body and storing it in the freezer. Marjorie didn't testify. But in private video diaries recorded from jail, she offered a different story, that Jay's death was the result of a confrontation with her lover, Larry Weisberg. She claimed she covered it up out of fear. Fear for her son's life, she said. The jury didn't believe her. On October 1, 2009, after an 8-month trial, Marjorie Ann ORBIN was sentenced to life in prison. No parole, no second chances. Her son Noah was just 8 years old when he lost both parents, one to murder, the other to justice. When that dark side is unleashed, said the judge, it's about as dark as it gets. Today, Marjorie sits behind bars, still proclaiming her innocence. J. Orban remains dismembered in memory, his body never whole again. 14. Valerie PAPE. January 23, 2000. Scottsdale, Arizona. Inside a modest suburban home, 47-year-old Valerie PAPE pulls the trigger. Her husband, Ira Pomerantz, a 60-year-old bar owner, drops to the floor, fatally shot in the back. The scene might have ended there, but it didn't. 4 days later, a trash collector behind a grocery store in Mesa makes a chilling discovery. A human torso, headless, armless, and legless, wrapped and dumped like garbage. It would be the only part of Ira's body ever recovered. Valerie PAPE, a French-born Scottsdale hairdresser, quickly emerged as the prime suspect. Neighbors described her as refined, elegant, even gentle. But beneath the polished exterior, something darker simmered. Investigators learned Valerie and Ira had a volatile relationship marred by debt, jealousy, and frequent arguments. She claimed he was violent, that she feared him, that knives had once been thrown. But when she confessed to police, her story was more calculated than chaotic. She admitted to shooting Ira during a domestic dispute, claimed she panicked, said nothing of the dismemberment, and offered no explanation for the missing limb's head or the 4-day delay before dumping the torso. Only silence. Inside her purse, detectives found a receipt for a reciprocating saw purchased weeks before the killing. In the kitchen, a single bullet matching the caliber used in the murder. In the garage of her Jaguar. The murder weapon hidden behind the seat. The delivery driver who saw her at the dumpster described a petite blonde woman in a luxury car. The license plate matched. It led right back to Valerie. Charged with first-degree murder, Valerie faced a lifetime in prison or worse. But in 2002, she accepted a guilty plea to second-degree murder, and a sentence of 16 years without parole. As part of the agreement, she never had to reveal who, if anyone, helped her cut up her husband. She never said where the rest of his body went. The secret died with her silence. Even behind bars, controversy followed. In 2006, Arizona approved her transfer to serve her sentence in her native France. But when officials learned France might release her early, the deal was canceled. The victims' daughters hadn't even been informed. "I haven't thought about Valerie in years," said one. "But the thought of her getting out is unreal." Pape once claimed she dismembered Ira out of fear of being blamed. But the evidence said otherwise. A purchased saw, a hidden gun, a calmly planned disposal. She never showed remorse, never shed light on the mutilation, and never explained why she returned to her salon the day after the murder as if nothing had happened. A petite woman in designer clothes, with a body in her trunk. Valerie PAPE served her time in Arizona. Her release date came quietly, far from the horror she left behind. But in Mesa, the memory of a headless torso in a grocery store dumpster still lingers. And so does the question, what kind of fear makes someone vanish, a man piece by piece, and never look back? 15. Pamela Phillips, the pipe bomb murder. November 1st, 1996. Tucson, Arizona. Gary Triano had just finished a round of golf at the exclusive La Paloma Country Club. The 53-year-old businessman climbed into his Lincoln town car, unaware that beneath the driver's seat, a bomb was waiting. Seconds later, a deafening explosion tore through the vehicle. His body was blown apart. He never had a chance. The man who once dined with power brokers was now dead in a country club parking lot, killed not by enemies in business, but by someone far closer. Pamela Phillips was a former Aspen socialite, a real estate broker with movie star looks and a reputation for charm. She was also Gary's ex-wife, the mother of his 2 youngest children, and the sole beneficiary of a $2 million life insurance policy on his life. Authorities would later argue that Pamela didn't just benefit from the blast, she planned it. Their marriage had collapsed after Gary's fortunes did. Once a high-rolling developer tied to Native American gaming ventures, he spiraled into financial ruin. Around the same time, Phillips walked away from the marriage and, prosecutors said, began building a new life, one funded by murder. The man she allegedly chose to carry out the killing was Ronald Young, a former lover and small-time con artist. In 2010, Young was convicted of murder and conspiracy. He had kept detailed records receipts, notes, even audio recordings linking Pamela to the crime. And in those tapes, Phillips was heard panicking, not in grief, but in fear of getting caught. "I'll go to my grave and not say a word," she promised. Young was paid $400,000 a cut from the insurance money Phillips collected after Gary's death. The cash was funneled through a complex web of bank transfers, orchestrated while Pamela lived in luxury across Europe. But she couldn't run forever. In 2009, over a decade after the murder, she was arrested in Austria, extradited to the U.S., and finally brought to trial. Her defense painted her as a scapegoat, accused too quickly, while shadowy underworld figures with alleged mob ties to Triano were ignored. They pointed fingers at a Tucson billionaire, cited FBI files, claimed the state ignored key witnesses. The jury didn't buy it. In 2014, after a 7-week trial and just 3 days of deliberation, Pamela Phillips was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. She was sentenced to natural life in prison, no possibility of parole. In the courtroom, she turned to the judge and declared, "I am innocent," 3 times. But Gary Triano's children, who had watched the trial unfold, called her actions unforgivable. "Pam destroyed lives because of her greed," said Heather Triano. "She killed our father and tore apart our family." Pamela Phillips now resides in an Arizona prison. Once draped in designer fashion, she wears a state-issued jumpsuit. Her Aspen days are long gone, but the sound of that explosion on a warm autumn afternoon is still heard in Tucson. It was the sound of a life destroyed by betrayal and a mother becoming a murderer. 16. Jessica Riggins, The Price of Freedom. August 5, 2007. Flagstaff, Arizona. In a quiet suburban home nestled in the Boulder Point neighborhood, 53-year-old Rusty Riggins lay dead shot in the back at close range. There was no struggle, no warning. Just one .22 caliber bullet fired from a handgun his wife had bought 2 days earlier. Jessica Renee Riggins, born in 1967, was not new to chaos. Her life was marked by pain, an abusive childhood, fractured relationships, and a violent marriage. But prosecutors argued she wasn't a victim. She was a predator. Cold, calculating, and willing to kill for money. Rusty had a criminal record, 2 felony convictions for domestic violence against Jessica. There was no denying their relationship was volatile. But by 2007, Rusty was reportedly turning things around. Off drugs, off alcohol, and building a small moving business. The couple was on the brink of divorce. A final court date loomed. That's when Jessica made her move. She left her children with relatives, traveled to Flagstaff, and bought a .22 caliber handgun using an address tied to Rusty to get past local ID restrictions. 2 days later, she shot him in the back once. No defensive wounds, no fight. Authorities said her motive was simple greed. Jessica believed Rusty had access to $30,000 in credit. With him out of the way and under a power of attorney she held, she planned to claim it during divorce proceedings. But when Rusty didn't show up to court, his mother called police. They found his body in a pool of blood. By then, Jessica was gone. She took Rusty's mother's car, drove to California, visited an ex-husband, and crossed into Mexico. Days later, she was arrested, trying to re-enter the U.S. What unraveled next was damning. Witnesses testified that Jessica had spoken openly about getting the money and in multiple conversations confessed to the killing. One acquaintance recalled her saying, "I did it. I killed him." Jessica claimed self-defense, citing years of domestic abuse and battered woman syndrome. She said Rusty attacked her that night, and she fired in fear for her life. But the evidence told another story: no bruises, no visible injuries, and no sign of a struggle. In 2009, after a 6-week trial, a jury convicted Jessica Riggins of first-degree murder, auto theft, and credit card theft. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. In court, she offered no apology, only silence. Rusty's mother, Judith, stood in the courtroom and said through tears, "It will take years for me to get over the violent way my son died." Then, in a moment few expected, she added, "He wants me to forgive you, and I do." Jessica remains behind bars in Arizona. She plans to appeal. Was she a broken woman, pushed to her limit, or a manipulator who used past abuse to excuse murder? Only one thing is certain: a man is dead, a family destroyed, and the truth buried somewhere between love, money, and a single silent gunshot to the back. 17. Betty Smithey, the longest sentence. January 1st, 1963. Phoenix, Arizona. Inside a modest family home, 15-month-old Sandy Gerberick lay lifeless in her crib, strangled to death in the early hours of the new year. The babysitter, 20-year-old Betty C. Smithey, was gone. The next day, police found her hitchhiking near the highway to Nogales. When asked what happened, she murmured, "I think I hurt the baby. I may have used a stocking." What followed would make history. Born in 1942, Smithey's childhood was marked by neglect, poverty, and trauma. After her father's death, her mother, unable to care for 7 daughters, lost custody. Betty bounced between foster homes, orphanages, and abusive adoptive families. She suffered from rickets, polio, and severe nearsightedness. By 16, she was already in juvenile custody for kidnapping another child while posing as their mother. She had no stability, no safety, no future. And on New Year's Day, 1963, she took a young life. Betty had been hired days earlier as a live-in babysitter. Irma Gerberick, a single mother, was cooking breakfast when her 6-year-old son screamed, "Mama, Sandy's dead." The toddler had been strangled. Smithey later told authorities she didn't remember doing it, only that she woke up beside the child with a stocking in her hand. In July of that year, a jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life without parole, making her the first woman in Arizona to receive that punishment under the state's then new laws. As she was led away, she screamed, "I'll kill myself." You watch, and she tried. More than once. In her early years in prison, Smithey was volatile and rebellious. Between 1974 and 1981, she escaped 4 times from 3 different facilities, evading capture for days and sometimes weeks. She was defiant, angry, and by her own words, utterly broken. But something shifted in 1983. A letter arrived from Irma Simmons, the mother of the child Betty killed. "I forgive you," it read. "May the Lord bless you and give you peace." That act of grace changed everything. "She made me feel I wasn't a monster," Smithey later said. "If she could forgive me, I had to forgive myself." Over the next 3 decades, she transformed behind bars, earning her GED, completing college courses, writing poetry, and mentoring younger inmates. Her prison record, once filled with infractions, grew quiet. Twice, governors denied her clemency. But in 2012, Governor John Brewer commuted her sentence, and the parole board voted to release her. At age 69, after 49 years in prison, Betty Smithey walked free, America's longest-serving female inmate. She now lives with her niece in Mesa, She walks with a cane. Her health is fragile. When asked what she thinks of the life she took, her voice is steady but hollow. I can't bring her back. But I've tried to become someone who never would have done what I did. A tragic beginning. A lifetime behind bars. And a question that lingers long after the cell door opens. Can a person ever truly repay a debt for the life of a child? 18. Angela Simpson. No remorse. August 5, 2009. Phoenix, Arizona. Firefighters were called to a blaze behind a local church, smoke rising from a plastic trash can. What they found inside would haunt investigators for years, the charred, dismembered body of a 46-year-old man in a wheelchair. His name was Terry Neely. He'd gone missing 3 days earlier, last seen leaving his assisted living facility in a motorized chair. His body was mutilated beyond recognition. Stabbed 50 times, strangled with a TV cord, his teeth pulled out, and a 3-inch nail driven into his skull. His limbs had been severed. His throat slit. Angela M. Simpson, born November 29, 1975, didn't deny it. In fact, she bragged about it. Already jailed for an unrelated armed robbery, Simpson coolly confessed in a televised interview, "I beat him to death. I killed him and cut him up." She explained how she lured Neely to a vacant apartment with promises of sex and drugs. Over the next 3 days, she tortured him, forcing him to watch through a mirror as she bludgeoned him with a tire iron and hammered nails into his body. Why, he was a snitch, she said. He needed to see what he deserved. Police found Neely's blood throughout the apartment. Witnesses recalled Simpson bragging about the murder. Her story matched the autopsy exactly. She was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and abandonment of a body. At sentencing, she showed no remorse. In fact, she expressed regret only that she couldn't kill again. "I'm a little upset that I won't be able to kill more snitches," she said. "But I have no remorse about killing him." Angela Simpson's history was marked by mental illness and violence. She was diagnosed with psychiatric disorders from age 10. But in her mind, what she did wasn't madness, it was justice. Informants and child molesters should be killed. Period, she stated. And when asked if she would kill again, her answer was chilling. "If the opportunity arises, I hope so." On March 29, 2012, she pleaded guilty to murder. Days later, she was sentenced to natural life in prison, plus 14 additional years. Under Arizona law, that means no parole, no commutation, no release of any kind. She will die behind bars. For the justice system, her sentence was the end. For the public, it was a window into the mind of someone who not only killed, but gloried in it. When asked how she felt about prison, Simpson replied, "I've got a lot of family in there. I can't wait to see 'em. It's not much of a punishment." Angela Simpson's crime was unforgettable not just for its brutality, but for its complete lack of conscience. As one Phoenix detective said, "In all my years, I've never seen anything like it." And Simpson, she agreed. "I deserved the death penalty," she said with a smile. "But I'm happy to be with my sisters. I'm home." 19. SHARI Tobin. Scattered in silence. Shari Lee Tobin was a quiet woman from rural Kansas. She grew up on a farm just outside Clifton, married her childhood neighbor Dwight, and built a life most would call ordinary. After 35 years of marriage, they had 3 children, a home in Scottsdale, Arizona, and a relationship quietly eroding from the inside. By November 2009, Dwight Tobin had made a decision he was leaving. He'd told Shari it was over and planned to return to the Midwest. A U-Haul was reserved. Bags were packed. But he never made it out of the house. On November 24th, the day before his planned departure, Shari shot him in the head. She claimed it was an accident, that she meant to kill herself, and Dwight had reached for the gun. But what followed told a different story. Instead of calling for help, SHARI dragged Dwight's body to the garage. She wrapped him in tarps and plastic. Then, over several days, she dismembered him, cutting his body into pieces with a saw. She scattered the remains across 3 Arizona counties. On December 20, 2009, a hiker found part of a body near Florence Junction in Pinal County. Days later, other remains turned up off I-10 in La Paz County, and again on the Beeline Highway in Maricopa County. All charred, decomposing, unidentifiable. Police had no idea the body parts belonged to a single man or who that man was. Meanwhile, SHARI maintained a facade. She sent fake texts and emails from Dwight's accounts telling family he'd gone to Mexico. But he missed Christmas and the birth of a grandchild. Eventually, in July 2010, one of the Tobin children reported their father missing. By then, all 3 sets of remains had already been discovered. DNA from Dwight's elderly parents confirmed the worst. The body parts matched. Police placed SHARI under surveillance. She was seen disposing of garbage bags behind a Chandler store. Inside were a dismantled handgun and blood-stained clothing. She was later caught cleaning the trunk of her car with bleach. When questioned, her story changed repeatedly. On August 14, 2010, she finally confessed. But even then, she claimed the killing was unintentional, that she panicked, that no one would have believed her. Authorities didn't buy it. The evidence pointed to premeditation, including a handgun purchased weeks earlier and trips to a gun club for target practice. SHARI pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. On May 19, 2013, she was sentenced to life in prison plus 31 additional years for tampering with evidence and abuse of a corpse. To this day, not all of Dwight Tobin's remains have been recovered. A marriage of 35 years ended not in divorce but in bloodshed. And the woman who once said she loved him scattered his body across a desert, hoping the wind would forget. "I didn't think anyone would believe me," she told detectives. But the truth didn't need belief. It just needed time to rise from the sand. 20. Amber Lynn Trudell, the yogi's last breath. Amber Lynn Trudell was on the surface an ordinary woman. A Tucson accountant in her late 20s, married, private, and soft-spoken. But beneath that exterior simmered years of unspoken trauma and emotional instability. By the fall of 2003, those fractures would erupt in the most violent way imaginable. She met 45-year-old Michael Dojaquez at Yoga Oasis. He was charismatic, beloved, a local yoga instructor, with a playful spirit and a devoted following. Trudell enrolled in his classes, then requested private instruction. Their connection quickly crossed lines. A romantic affair bloomed even as Trudell remained married. But what started as a secret relationship spiraled into obsession and ultimately into bloodshed. On the night of September 26, 2003, Michael was found slumped on the front porch of his Tucson home, a single bullet to the head. Dead. The next morning, Amber disappeared. Detectives discovered Michael had ended the relationship. He had told friends she was unstable, that he planned to cut ties. Prosecutors would later argue that was her motive, that rejection turned lethal. Amber's version was different. She claimed Michael raped and beat her that night. That in the aftermath, despondent and remorseful, he guided her handgun in it to his own forehead and pulled the trigger. But her story never quite held together. After the shooting, Trudell fled the state, first to Show Low, where she buried the murder weapon with her husband's help, then across the country to rural Ogdensburg, New York. She was arrested nearly a month later on October 23, 2003. Back in Arizona, she faced first-degree murder charges. But her first trial ended in a hung jury. Some jurors believed it was murder. Others leaned toward manslaughter. A second trial followed in 2005. This time the verdict was clear, guilty of second-degree murder. Jurors were convinced by her own words. She admitted to having the loaded gun, admitted it was pointed at Michael's head, and admitted she pulled the trigger. On October 17, 2005, Amber Lynn Trudell was sentenced to 13 years in prison. She would be required to serve 85% of that time, with credit for 725 days already served. In court, Michael's family spoke of his laughter, his compassion, and the void left behind. She should have gotten the rest of her life, said his daughter Brianna, because that's how long I get to spend without my dad. Amber showed little emotion, no apology, no remorse. The defense painted her as a woman haunted by childhood abuse whose trauma distorted her judgment. But the jury wasn't persuaded. Amber Trudell's name faded quickly from headlines, yet the damage endured. A teacher beloved by his students, a father adored by his children, gone in a flash of betrayal, and a woman once searching for peace through yoga found violence instead. To this day, Michael's brother said she does not realize the value of this man's life. 21. Connie Villa, a mother's final possession. December 25, 2013. In the quiet city of Casa Grande, Arizona, Christmas Day turned into a massacre inside a small apartment where the gifts remained unopened and a child lay dead behind a bathroom door. Connie Villa, 35. Once a mother of 4 and former Army wife, had spiraled into darkness. To those who knew her, she had once seemed loving, but underneath paranoia and control consumed her. The final trigger, a custody battle. Her ex-husband, Adam Villa, was set to assume custody of their 3 youngest children, ages 3, 5, and 8. Connie couldn't accept it, and so she made a decision that would haunt the state of Arizona. On Christmas Day, she gave each child prescription narcotics, hoping to sedate and silently kill them. The 3 younger ones obeyed, but her oldest daughter, 13-year-old Aniarael Matias, refused. That defiance cost her everything. Connie dragged Aniarael into the bathroom, and there, using only her hands, she suffocated her. No weapon, no hesitation, just control taken by force. When the drugs failed, Connie's hands did not. But she wasn't done. She lured her ex-husband Adam to the apartment. When he arrived, she stabbed him repeatedly in the torso. Bleeding, he fled and called 911 from his car, racing to the hospital, his life dangling by a thread. Police arrived minutes later and forced their way in. What they found was chaos and terror. Connie was standing knife in hand, bloodied from self-inflicted wounds. Her 3 youngest children stood beside her, alive barely. In the bathroom, the lifeless body of Aniarael lay still. It was clear Connie had intended to kill all 5 people in that home, and then herself. After recovering in the hospital, she confessed. She told detectives she'd done it to keep her children from their father. That death in her mind was better than custody. The autopsy for Aniarael was inconclusive. No bruises, no visible trauma. But Connie's own words sealed the truth. She wouldn't take the pills, so I had to do it myself. She was arrested 4 days after the murder and charged with first-degree murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear this wasn't spontaneous. It was a methodical, calculated effort to erase an entire family from the earth. Connie Villa remains in jail in Pinal County, held without bond, awaiting trial. Her surviving children, all placed with family, carry invisible wounds no court can heal. What drives a mother to kill her own child? Psychologists might point to narcissistic rage or pathological control, the idea that if she couldn't have them, no one could. But no clinical term can undo what happened that night. Aniarael Matias, just 13, died not in some stranger's home or at the hands of a criminal, but in her own bathroom by the hands of her mother. She was a gentle, kind, and beautiful spirit, said her father, taken from us much too soon.